Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about homeowner associations, HOAs. Some of them are great, some of them are livable, a few are a nightmare. This video is about what things to check and how to spot a bad HOA. And by the way, if you have questions or need help, our contact information is in the description below. In the 50s and 60s, there were very few HOAs. Today, unless you live way out in the boonies, it's hard to find a home that is not in an HOA or subject to rules about what you can do with your property. And that's not always a bad thing. No restrictions and no zoning can leave you looking at the possibility of a neighbor opening a junkyard. The HOA is supposed to be there to protect values and preserve the aesthetics of the community, and most HOAs do that. But there are some horror stories out there. Most HOA horror stories have to do with an excessive amount of rules, along with military-like management. When we lived in the DC area, the townhouse community we lived in cited us for having too much ivy on the small patch of front yard we had. There was a rule about how much ivy residents could have. We replaced it because we didn't want to be fined. And it could have turned into a nightmare story if we refused, because HOAs can fine you daily. And that can build up to a substantial amount of money. And if you don't pay, they can put a lien on your house. HOAs have a lot of power. There are several stories of people getting fined for ridiculous infractions, not removing bins right the minute after garbage is collected, planting the wrong kind of flowers or trees in the wrong spot. And one that made national news, a guy flying an American flag in his yard. Those types of heavy restrictions are more common really in heavily populated areas. Here in West Virginia, it's kind of rare to see over the top heavily restricted communities. The vibe here is an overall opposition to control. So the HOAs here are, for the most part, pretty tame. But it's really important to read all the HOA documents, the bylaws, and the covenants and restrictions, because they can vary. Some will be stricter than others. Some people like a strict HOA, some don't. One of the issues I've run into here periodically is home for sale in a subdivision where the HOA is no longer active. And the seller tells you they haven't heard anything from the HOA for quite a while, haven't received any requests to pay fees for quite a while. That doesn't mean, however, that the rules are no longer valid. If they are on file at the courthouse, the community is still subject to the HOA rules and bylaws, just know when they're currently to enforce them. And that could change if community members decide to revive the HOA. So even though there's no HOA in existence currently, it's a good idea to access the covenants and restrictions from the courthouse so you know if there's something there that you absolutely can't live with. Here's something else. Any fees owed by the seller are supposed to be paid at settlement from the seller proceeds. If the title company fails to collect those fees, you may get a bill from the HOA asking you to pay those back fees after you buy the property. You can go after the past owner for them, but that's probably going to involve hiring an attorney. No operating HOA or one that is inactive can come with its own set of problems. A few years back, we sold a house where the seller disclosed that there had been an HOA in the past, and there were recorded documents on file, but he hadn't heard from any HOA member for a year at least, and there was no HOA contact. The guy that bought the house constructed a pretty expensive shooting range. One of the restrictions was no discharging of firearms. Shortly after he moved in, a few of the residents reestablished the HOA and told him he could not be doing any shooting. He threatened to sue. I'm not sure how all that turned out, but I doubt it would go in his favor if those rules were in place when he bought the house. So if there are covenants and restrictions on file before buying the house, be sure to access them and read them and assume they could be enforced in the future. So in addition to checking the covenants and restrictions on file at the courthouse, it's a good idea to drive around the neighborhood. If it looks unkept, then that's probably a sign of an inactive or ineffective HOA. Also, a good idea to talk to some neighbors. Ask some questions about the HOA. It's also a good idea to check the financials of the HOA. Make sure there are reserves there to avoid special assessments. So if you have some thoughts or experience with an HOA, I'd love to hear about it. Share that with us in the comments below. Over there on the right is a video you might like. It goes into detail about unrestricted land. Okay, thanks for tuning in, and you have a great week. I'll see you next week. Bye.